Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dwyan. Welcome to my channel. And today we're going to be looking at white supremacy. White supremacy. Here's our title, White Supremacy from a White Christian Perspective. Okay, so obviously I think it's always important to define white supremacy before we start going. So let's go straight into Webster's dictionary to define what white supremacy is. So we start, first of all, white supremacy is the belief that the white race is inherently superior to other races and that white people should have control over people of other races. Okay, that's not me saying it. That's a definition straight from Webster. Okay, so that's important. I like their second definition, right, which is white supremacy is the social, economic, and political systems that collectively enable white people to maintain power over people of other races. Okay, so I think this is very important to understand. And I highlighted the word systems there because we have to understand white supremacy in the context that it is a system. Okay, it is a system. What do I mean by that? Well, let's look at some systems. Government, for example, is a system, right? People leave government generation after generation. You see how government still continues because government is a system, right? There are things in place that ensure the continuation of government in this particular example. Same with companies, with corporations. If anything happens to the head of a corporation or the founder of a corporation, let's just pick Elon Musk, for example. If anything happens to him, Tesla is still going to be there. SpaceX is still going to be there because those are systems that ensure the continuation regardless of any individual. Okay, so in the same sense that we have to look at white supremacy, as you can see in the definition there, that white supremacy is also a system. Okay, I think that's very key for us to understand. Now, the other thing that isn't indicated there, which I would like to add about white supremacy, is that white supremacy is a global system or international system worldwide. And that's very important for us to understand this in particular. It's not just an American thing. It is an international thing historically that has happened. The other thing about white supremacy, and this is testimony to it being a system, is that none of us alive on the planet today, okay, created this white supremacy, or this happened before all of us were born. And that's very critical to understand as well. Okay, so I said earlier that we're going to be looking at it from the point of view of a white Christian. So who is this white Christian that we're going to look at it to? Well, we're going to look at Robert P. Jones. He just came out with a book, a few months old now, maybe 3-4 months old, called The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. It's actually his third book. He came up with 2 other books previously. As you can see, they won an award: The End of White Christian America and White Too Long. Okay. But we're interested really in this particular book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. And again, this is coming from the perspective of a white Christian. Let's take a little bit of a look at Robert P. Jones. He's the president and founder, as we can see there, of the PRRI, which is this website. Again, a link to it will be in the description if anyone is interested in looking at this website. But it's basically a research institute on religion. It is the Public Religion Research Institute, of which he is the founder and president. Now, he also has written the books that I've told you before. He writes regularly on politics for the Atlantic Time, religion. He holds a PhD in religion from Emory University. And he's from Mississippi, which is deep South. His family comes from there. So this is a good person, I think, based on that, to hear from what is white supremacy. If anyone knows, it's going to be him, right? Not only because he comes from Mississippi, but he's also studied it. So this is the person we're going to be looking at in terms of white supremacy. Okay. Now, I'm going to be looking at an interview that he did. And I'm just going to pick like 3 or 4 different parts of the interview to try and open up this. This is going to be a series on white supremacy that I'm going to do, but this video right now is just to introduce it from his perspective. Okay, so we've defined white supremacy, and now we have said that, okay, what are the roots of white supremacy? Let's see what he has to say on it. Okay, so let me just pull up a video first of all. Let's look at his own video. It's only about a minute long of why he wrote this book called The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy.
My new book, The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy and the Path to a Shared American Future, links 500 years of history on this continent, and it helps explain how the United States could be founded on this kind of philosophical framework of democracy built on a bedrock of mass racial violence.
What do you want?
One of the things that I think this book does is it takes up this question of who are we as a country? Are we a divinely ordained country that is designed to be a Christian nation? Or are we a multiracial, multi-religious, pluralistic democracy? This is a question we've never fully resolved. And it's a question
we've never fully resolved, whether we are one of those two.
That's at the center of the new book. So one of the things that makes this work urgent, I think for me, is that the questions of race and religion are absolutely at the heart of what's tearing this country apart. Why are we in 2023, 2024, continuing to argue about our history lessons, continuing to argue about the Civil War, slavery, these things that I think many people thought were long settled questions. And I think it's because these questions, the root of those questions, that is, what kind of a country are we and who is this country for? Those questions have never really honestly and fully been answered. So one of the reasons I wrote the book
have never been answered. You guys hear that? Let me make sure my audio is kicking in here. Yeah, you guys heard that? It has never been answered. This is a white Christian from Mississippi saying this, not me. Okay, even though I agree with him. It has not been answered. Okay, let's get back to it.
Was to try to get at the heart of those questions, to trace it back to the beginnings, bring it to the light of day so that we can more honestly deal with it and hopefully find our way to a better future.
Okay, yeah, of course, he had to put Obama in there. So that's an intro to his book, right? So now we're just going to look at this interview where he's going to be asked questions, and there's some particular things that I think are very interesting. So again, remember, we want to find out what are the hidden roots, because that's his book, right? So let's see what he says.
Yeah. What was it about that year in particular that had you going back to that time?
Yeah.
Okay, the year, is 1493, right? A lot of us have heard about 1492, but he's specifically talking about 1493 as being a very important year, which he cites as really the root of white supremacy, particularly in America, right? But really the root of white supremacy.
Well, I think we've had a lot of debates, right? The 1619 Project,
Sure.
That really challenged this idea that, you could see the country's history in that microcosm. I often think of that postage stamp, right? That's got the all white men kind of surrounded around a table with their quill pens and their knickers, on,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
That is the origin story of the country,
Sure.
right? And so I think one of the great gifts that the 1619 Project gave us was really blowing that up. And instead of that little tiny frame of those few people in that room being the story of America, of opening the aperture so we could tell a much broader story. And I feel like, what I'm doing here is a sort of yes and
Sure.
response to the 1619 Project, and taking it even further back and pulling the lens back so that we not only see the first enslaved people, landing on the shores of the country, but we see the original inhabitants of this country
sure.
and European contact. And so that's what 1493 is about, not the year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right, 1492, that we all learned about in elementary school.
Also never stepped foot on the North American continent.
That's exactly right, yes. Never set foot here in the United States, despite the fact that every city, including the
Yeah.
one we're in, has Columbus Circle and, you know, all of that. But 1493 was the year he went back to Spain and loaded up even more ships with more soldiers and more missionaries and got the blessing of the Pope at the time to come in and conquer. And you know, and there was this whole series of papal documents that 1493 was kind of the capstone for. That these documents say things like that you have the blessing of the church to conquer, to steal, to take property, and to submit the ones who survive, to submit these people to perpetual slavery, right? To reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. That's in the hands of the leader of the entire Western Christian church at the time.
And that's the doctrine of discovery, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so remember the book is called The Hidden Roots of White Supremacy. And he cites this year, 1493, because this was a papal bull or a law that was passed through the church called the Doctrine of Discovery. So what is the Doctrine of Discovery? Okay, well, he talks about it. It's basically a justification for Christians to go out and basically anyone who's not a Christian, conquer them, enslave them, terrorize them, etc., etc. Okay, so this is an important point to understand. So I just want to go quickly and look at this issue, just make sure that it's clear in everyone's minds, this issue of the doctrine of discovery, the belief that God has designated all territory not inhabited or controlled by Christians as their new promised land, right? And that was 1493. And of course, Columbus, because remember in 1492, he didn't actually come to the North American continent. I believe it was somewhere in the Caribbean where he was. And then he went back to Spain. And then a year later, approximately 1493, after getting this this justification or this permission by the Pope, by the Vatican, to then go back and basically raid the new lands, enslave the people, kill the people, etc., etc. We all know what happened, right? So this is the roots of white supremacy. Okay, this is the roots of white supremacy, based on this doctrine of discovery. Okay, so let's go back a little bit to the video, right? So we can go here and let's see. So the next part that I want to look at is I want to continue with this doctrine of discovery a little bit, you know. Let's see what he says here.
The doctrine of discovery.
Well, this is the thing I became more and more convinced of in the book, right? And I should say that, so I've got a PhD in religion, I've got a seminary degree. This was not something on my radar, the doctrine of discovery, right? Maybe I heard the term, but
yeah, I didn't know of it.
It did not show up as something like a significant.
I think many of us did not. You know, a lot of people didn't, especially whites, I must add. You know, now I knew of it, and I'm sure a lot of black people did. We knew about the Vatican, basically the Pope saying that, go and conquer, you know. But again, he's saying he didn't even hear about it.
Significant watershed moment in, you know, Western Christian history. Didn't register that at all. So I think, to me, once I started reading these documents, and they're online at the doctrineofdiscovery.org, by the way, if anybody wants to read them, they're in Latin, they're in English, you can read to your heart's content. And when you read these documents and you realize, oh, wait a minute, the transatlantic slave trade doesn't get off the ground without this kind of moral justification.
Sure.
Right? The genocide against indigenous people all over the Americas doesn't really get off the ground without this kind of permission from a religious authority, right, to do these awful things. And then when you start watching it through, it's not just that it showed up and got all that off the ground and went away, but it keeps showing up, right? And so
it keeps showing up.
It is, all these terms we have: manifest destiny, America's a new Zion. It's a city set on the hill. To be an example, example to the rest of the world. All of these have a straight line back to this logic, right? That there's something superior about Western, like European civilization. There's something superior about Christianity, and it's so superior, in fact, that it justifies violence in order to kind of spread its superior message around the world. And then just to be real quickly, just practically speaking, it does show up, right, in things like Declaration of Independence, right? It has, all these kind of nice things. And then down there, it's got this line about merciless savages, right?
Yeah.
In the Declaration of Independence. The Constitution, right, specifically excludes Native Americans, right?
Are you guys listening? This is white supremacy.
From the protections in the Constitution, and on and on and on. It's in U.S. law. It shows up as recently as Ruth Bader Ginsburg citing it in a case.
Didn't know. Very disappointed.
Like
Didn't
directly.
know this.
Okay, so it keeps coming up, right? I want to take a quick look at this case. I hope I have it. I think I do. I want to take a quick look at this case, everybody. Right? This is the case here. As you can see, the paper bulls. This is it. The city of Sherrill, New York versus the Oneida, excuse me if I'm pronouncing that wrong, Indian Nation of New York. Okay? And the key thing is this is an opinion by Chief Justice, not the Chief Justice, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. The Supreme Court ruled, listen to this, everybody. This is 2005. This is not 18 something or 14 something. The Supreme Court ruled that sovereign indigenous nations, okay, could not regain sovereignty over land once it had relinquished control over the land to parties subject to the jurisdiction of state governments. Okay? So, and again, the opinion relied on the doctrine of discovery. You can see right here, the opinion relied on the doctrine of discovery. Okay, there was only one dissent, and that was by Justice Paul Stevens, as you can see there, but he did not challenge the doctrine of discovery. So you can see that this doctrine is still being used to justify not basically granting land or handing back land to the indigenous nations of America. And this is the case, 2005, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so this is what he's talking about. As you can see, this doctrine of discovery continuing. It's not just, as he said, it just went away or it's something that happened in the past. It is something that U.S. law today is using to cite as, as justification or to cite as reasoning for any opinions that have been made by the Chief Justice. So this is very, very important indeed. I know I keep saying this is very important, but it is. Okay, so that's what he was referring to there. So let's switch back and see what else he has to see. We have a couple more things that I just want to point out. Okay, let's go back to the video. Okay, now, again, we're going to continue with this issue of, let me make sure I got it here.
There is a straight line between that doctrine and then into what we would, maybe classify as modernity with the enslavement of millions and millions and millions of Africans and then African Americans from the doctrine of discovery.
Well, this is the thing I became more and more convinced of in the book, right? And I should say that, so I've got a PhD in religion, I've got a seminary degree. This was not something on my radar, the doctrine of discovery, right? Maybe I heard the term, but
I didn't know of it.
It did not show up as something like a significant watershed moment in, Western Christian history. Didn't register that at all. So I think, to me, once I started reading these documents, and they're online at thedoctrineofdiscovery.org, by the way, if anybody wants to.
Okay, I just had to play it again so that we heard it, that there is a direct line to the doctrine of discovery. Okay. Okay, and then I'm sorry, guys. I just have to get this. We did the 12 already. Okay. Let's
One of the
move on.
things you talk about in the book is this idea that's gaining popularity within the conservative movement of not wanting to teach the reality of history because it will create white guilt or things along that line. What would you say to that? I mean, what is the benefit of truth telling, as you call it in the book, and going through history and actually grappling with the reality of what we have done to people?
Yeah.
Great question. This is happening in America right now, right? There is this backlash, if you will, particularly from white male Christian conservatives, which is this backlash of, not trying to really get too deep into this history. Okay.
Well, it's kind of astonishing to me, actually. So I grew up, right, Southern Baptist, evangelical in Mississippi. And so,
You were in it.
But when I hear most of the people who are making those arguments are from that world, right? They're kind of conservative, white, evangelical Christian people. And when I think about the kind of principles that were in that, like in things like Jesus saying, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free, right? That this kind of cover up, is quite shocking, right? For a religion
Sure.
that's built on this kind of principle of kind of knowing the truth. That's where you find freedom from. In my own mind, and one of the things that's kind of spurred me along is a great quote by James Baldwin, where he was asked about like African American people, why aren't they more angry?
Okay, I'm sorry to cut it off right there. I should have cut it off a little bit earlier, but I just wanted to hop on that point, which is this idea that, making whites feel uncomfortable, to talk about this issue, And as you said, that this speaking the truth, the Bible, the very Bible says the truth shall set you free. Okay. Now let's hear about James Baldwin.
At white people. Why isn't there more violence toward white people? And he says, look, honestly, for many African Americans, they have this perception and understanding of the kind of dilemma that white people put themselves in. And by this combination of kind of doing one thing and saying another, and he said they considered, he said that many of us consider them the slightly mad victims of their own brainwashing.
Mm.
Right. And I feel like that's exactly what's happening right now is there's this sense of kind of desperately trying to hold on to the brainwashing. I mean,
That's
after
right.
all, like, it is that white Christian majority that has historically written the textbooks, right? That are in schools, that has kind of controlled the narrative, right? And I think this losing control of the narrative is why we're seeing this kind of great
Exactly.
freak out moment and this real attempt
Yep.
to control these curriculum. The last time we saw stuff like this was actually following the South's defeat in the Civil War.
Okay, so you guys got that, right? Now, so I just want to recap just really quickly, we define white supremacy, we see where the roots of white supremacy are. It goes directly to the Pope, okay? And remember, this is 1493, okay? This is before, there were no Protestants in the world, right? This is way before, a couple hundred years before the Protestant Reformation and the whole Martin Luther and the breaking of the Church of England, the creation of all these denominations and all that. This is before that. Everybody at this particular time was basically looking to the Pope as the sort of international body of the day, the person who could grant permission. Everybody was pretty much under the Catholics. So that's very important to understand at this particular point in time, okay? So in other words, the Pope's authority was worldwide. Whatever the Pope said, it went. Okay. Now, the other aspect, and I'll end the video after this, the final thing that I think I want to bring out in this sort of this definition of white supremacy, this origin of white supremacy, is the link to religion. Let's hear what he says about it. I hope I managed to get it. 1711.
Yeah, I actually don't see them as that separate.
Let's hear the question.
As a vehicle to get where we are here, and now they'll jettison that because now the ultimate goal is, a Western chauvinist, whatever, Proud Boy dystopia.
Yeah, I actually don't see them as that separate. I don't think it's.
He doesn't see them as separate. He's referring to, and I'm sorry about this, I didn't go back and probably get this clip, but they're talking about religion, white supremacy, and religion, right? And he said, I don't see them as separate. Listen carefully.
It's the case that Christianity has just been used as a tool by something that's outside of it called white supremacy. Let's think of the benefits of this history. If you go back, right, it wasn't just Ferdinand and Isabella kind of going forward. They were like, no, we actually want the moral and religious authority and justification for doing this. So who do they appeal to? They appeal to the Christian church, which willingly aids and abets this, campaign of violence against anyone who's not Christian. I mean, that really is when you read these documents from the 15th century, that's the criteria. If you find anyone out in the world who is not Christian, you have the right then to kind of conquer them and kill them, conquer them, steal their goods, enslave them in the name of the church, right? So these things have been, it's not something reaching in and using the church. These things have been embedded in the Western Christian church from the get-go.
Whoa. Okay. We hear that, guys. It's been embedded. They didn't just use it, it's embedded. They're together. Christianity, particularly in America, Christianity and white supremacy are basically one. And that's a very important point. And as I go through this series and talk about white supremacy, this will become more apparent, I think, a lot of justifications were made basically from Christianity to justify what went on in terms of slavery, colonialism, occupation, whatever word you want to call it. So I think that's really important. So I don't want to make the video too long, guys. I just wanted to give you a sort of intro to white supremacy. I'm going to continue to talk about it, and because I think it's a really important topic. Like I said, I believe it's a global a system that is in place, and that each new generation that happens to come about gets involved in it and perpetuates it knowingly or unknowingly, subconsciously or consciously. And these are some of the things that I'd like to point out as time goes on. It's a very important topic. We are all victims of white supremacy, not just Black and indigenous people of this country. All of us, including whites, as you can hear him say there. I just want to end quickly with a comment he made, if I can find it, I think 2734. This may not be it. If not, we'll end the video, but I think this is an interesting comment that he makes.
Right, so it's been a lot of Baptists, not a lot of Southern Baptists, I will say, but other kinds of Baptists across the South, Methodists, Lutherans, Episcopalians. And then the other thing that's been nice to see is that in many of these, Martin Luther King said, right, 11 a.m. on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. That's largely still true today. But what has been happening that I've seen some hope in is many kind of predominantly white, predominantly Black churches have been coming together to do things like read books. I've been at several of those things where I've come in to talk, and it's been a mixed group of two different churches who came together. Like this past spring, I was at Ebenezer, Martin Luther King Jr.'s in Atlanta, historic church, but also St. Luke's Episcopalian church that joined together with them to kind of talk about these issues. Yes, that's right.
Church, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and you have a plea to your fellow Christians in here. Do you feel like the message is, I don't know, easier received from someone who shares the faith, who kind of comes from the background that you do? Do you think that you're able to speak to them in a way that they are accepting it because you come from the background that you do?
I hope so. I mean, it's not possible really for me to write a finger wagging book unless it's pointing back at me. Like I said, I'm deeply in this world. My parents, my family, a lot of friends still, Baptist pastors in the South. I mean, this is a world that I'm deeply connected to.
Yeah.
So, I hope that somebody who looks like me with my background, and here's the thing, you hear all this stuff about, we don't want to make white people feel uncomfortable, right? Or we don't want to shame people. But I could tell you, there's certainly some hard moments, especially looking at my own family's history, coming to grips with some of that, that I did in the last book, White Too Long, most specifically. But overall, my experience, and certainly there have been some tears shed, right, by reading some very difficult things that were very personal, very close to home. But at the end of the day, that hasn't been the overwhelming experience. I do think it's been one of coming to health, healing, integrity. And those are liberating, right?
Liberating.
Those aren't those don't chain you up. Those they do literally set you free.
Yeah.
Right. Because you're no longer trying to protect
set you free.
all these things that you kind of know are not really legitimately protectable.
Yeah. There's definitely some deliverance aspects to that.
Okay. So that's a very important point, because a lot of whites are very uncomfortable to talk about white supremacy, to talk about this legacy that is still with us in many ways, and definitely in covert ways, not as obvious as it once was. And remember what he said earlier, this issue has not been addressed. This issue has not been addressed. This relationship between not just blacks and whites, but also the indigenous population as well. These issues have not been addressed. And that's why it continues and persists today. But as he says, getting to the truth and dealing with it and coming to terms with it is liberating, right? It gives you integrity. And of course, the truth shall set you free, which is obviously right there in the Bible as well. So this has been very interesting. I want to thank everybody for watching. I hope you guys got a little something with it. This is going to be a series. I'm going to continue to talk about white supremacy, different aspects. And it's a very important topic, as he just explained there, that we all need to be engaged in. Remember, we are all victims of this system of global or international white supremacy. We are all victims of it because none of us created it. We found it here, and we pretty much had to just deal with it in our own ways. And in many respects, we haven't dealt with it because it's such a difficult past. So please continue to follow me, subscribe, like the video. Hopefully, all the links for this particular interview will be in the video, as well as the Doctrine of Discovery.org. I'll put that link in the video, but you can just go there and do that. It'll all be there. Please follow, continue to follow. I will continue to speak on this. It's a very important topic. I thank you all very much for listening, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Take care. All the best.